Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is going to be a very, very enjoyable conversation. Y'all are going to enjoy this a lot. Most of the time on our program, we have people from our church or other friends, people who are very like-minded. An echo chamber that term's been used quite a bit. But tonight, that is not going to be the case. Tonight, I am joined with Will and Brian from the Church Split podcast. And this is a podcast that in one of our recent episodes, they were brought up, their names were brought up, and a few insults might have been thrown their way. And I have a policy. If I talk about you on the program, that is an invitation to the program. And I do that to help keep me under control, so I don't go after people too much and kind of try to stick to issues and things like that. And so I did. I went after, I had said some things. They did a response video, and so I put it out there. It's like, hey, if you guys want to come on the show and talk about it, let's do it. And they were willing and ready to do it. And so that's what we're doing tonight. So if for those of you who do not know who they are, I want to introduce them to you, or let them introduce themselves to you. So Will and Brian, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are, your religious background, current beliefs, and of course the Church Split podcast.
Well, first off, Pastor Tommy, thanks for having us on. We're very excited to be here. Just so you know, we did find the few insults that were thrown our way actually entertaining. I was laughing at it. You saw that. You probably saw the response. So
they were clever.
Hey, I've said it before. If you insult me or you go after me, just please make it a good time. Make me at least have fun with it. So thank you for that. But my name is Will. I have. I'll just do the whole quick synopsis. Obviously, you can't give everyone a whole thing about your life in 5 seconds flat, but I was raised in the IFB. I was raised in a moderate IFB. Then over time, I just questioned some of the things. Long story short, I ended up pastoring an independent Baptist church. I am in ministry, and I'm currently working at another church that is not. But I started the Church Split podcast because I noticed that the church is very split. I have, as a pastor, experienced church splits. Most pastors I've talked to have experienced horrible church splits and the terrible things that they can go through. And a lot of it comes into not being objective biblically, or it turns into just being mean to each other. And I wanted a place where we could sit down and have difficult conversations about church splitting topics. And so that's what it is. That's me in a nutshell.
Switch it to my regular camera.
And I'm Brian. I help with the podcast. I'm on it sometimes, but mostly I'm the behind the scenes guy. Will and I are good friends, and I thought, hey, I could help him do a podcast. I like computer stuff. And I love theology and apologetics. So that's how I kind of got involved in it. I grew up Calvinist, so all the IFB stuff is pretty new to me, but I find it massively entertaining with some of the things that I've found out about it. So I've enjoyed learning about it, talking about it, and asking good questions.
But to be clear, you're not a Calvinist though anymore,
I'm
right?
not a Calvinist anymore.
I feel like you should mention that before, because sometimes it gets a bad rap. But he even went to Calvin College, so he's very Calvinist.
Very indoctrinated from the beginning.
Okay. Well, hey, I'm glad you're not a Calvinist anymore. That's a good thing. But all right, well, hey, we're having a little bit of video issue on the Zoom end of things. So Austin, if you want to play around with that and maybe try to do a new screen capture, or even put them on the television, you'll just have to drag it over and kind of watch on the monitor that way. But this is our first time doing one kind of this particular method. So we were bound to have some kind of issue. It was working perfect. But
first time for everything.
I've been saying I need to get a trendy in our church. I need to stop being so mean to them. That way they can kind of help us with a lot of these problems that we have. But
you just need one.
Yeah.
Just one.
Just one. If I can get them to come over to our side and they could fix all these things. But anyway, so yeah, one of the things that we want to kind of start off talking about. So obviously, there's a lot of differences between the old IFB, the old-time religion crowd, the old paths crowd, and a lot of what I refer to as trendies. Now, that term trendy, how that came. Now, I've been seeing that term go around. I'm taking credit. I did start that. I've been using that term for a long time. And where that came from is I was noticing that it seemed like in the IFB world, a lot of the younger generation was getting turned off to a lot of the, some of the crazy stuff, in the IFB world. And there was a lot of criticism going around. You had the videos going viral of, preachers, ripping on whatever, maybe ripping on the homos, using homophobic slurs and things like that. And it seemed like a lot of guys are like, I want to distance myself from that. We're not that mean. We're not that crazy. And, and you do hear some dumb preaching sometimes, in the IFB world. And so it seemed like, to me, this was my judgment that I made when I'm seeing a lot of these guys kind of get away from the IFB, start dressing different, bringing in the more contemporary music. It seemed to me like these guys were trying to be more appealing to the world, more appealing to the lost. It seemed to me like they were just trying to avoid all criticism. And so as they started changing everything, and in the IFB world, we ain't changing, we're sticking to the old paths, and they're changing all these things. And you're seeing them do what to me is just weird stuff, why are you bringing in these bistro tables? Why are you bringing in, why are you not wearing the suit and tie? Why are you doing all these things? And it seemed like they were just always doing whatever was trending. And so that's kind of where I came with that term, trendy. They're just trying to fit in with the world, be more appealing and liked, and distance themselves from that really nasty IFB crowd. And so, that was a term that I use. And in the IFB world, we do like to throw labels around quite a bit. So does that make sense to you guys? When I'm talking about trendy, I mean, you have to admit that there's a different look to what you guys do than what we do. It's not just the message so much, but it's often the look and things like that. You understand what I'm saying?
Well, I think I do somewhat. I think, and the one that kind of caught me off guard was just the trendy thing, because it's almost, I think it's almost kind of mischaracterizing what trend means, because trend is just really just a general direction in which something is going. So I would look at the IFB and say, well, you guys are following other trends, and you've labeled those trends old paths, which were a new trend at some point. I would love, from my perspective, kind of being newer to the IFB, I don't even know, when is old paths? It's like this kind of nebulous description that doesn't seem to make any sense.
Right. Well, and that's a label I'll accept. Now, I just preached a message at another church. It's not out there on the internet for people to hear, but on what are the old paths. And I preached on what I believe the Jeremiah 6:16 old paths are, because yes, old paths, hashtag old paths, it means wearing a suit and tie. It means dress in a certain way. It means King James Bible. It means confrontational soul winning. It's the IFB culture. And Will would probably understand the IFB culture, being from it, but there is a culture, there's a way that we dress, there's a way that we sing, there's a way that we act. And a lot of older preachers, they want to preserve that culture. And the thing is, if you're going to preserve something, and if you're going to fight for something, it really helps if you have a Bible verse that you can use. And so, Jeremiah 6:16, we got it right there. But I wish the old paths crowd would admit that, Jeremiah 6:16 doesn't necessarily mean church buses. It doesn't necessarily mean, pews and wooden pulpits. Right.
Yeah. No, it's true. Jeremiah is more referring to, something. I mean, Jeremiah was a Jew in Israel, and so he's more referring to.
Yeah, do I have to grow my hair longer by the ears, or?
Right. Well,
but yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, old paths, no. Old paths is off the collar and off the ears. So those are the rules to be on the old paths.
It's true. And I was very negligent with haircuts. So whenever I touched my ears, I was always getting in trouble. Right. But yeah, no. So I guess labels for me are always, obviously this help us kind of put things in certain boxes, but they're always a little ambiguous and never quite fully nailed down. I was new to the Twitterverse only recently, essentially, and it was funny when I saw trendies throwing around a lot, and I was like, what? who are the trendies? And then through context, I started picking up on what it meant. And for me,
it's me.
I was like, oh, I'm a trendy. What? And it was funny because I found it funny being called a trendy, because if I was a pastor in an independent fundamental Baptist church at the time. Now, it wasn't like the IFB culture. Actually, when it says independent, it was very much, it was its own little country culture thing. And I mean, dude, we have no budget. The place is half fallen apart. I had bats literally in the attic that we were trying to get rid of. It went a leaky basement. I'm like, I wish I had the budget of some of the trendies, because my church is falling apart. So I was janitor, maintenance man, all that stuff. So yeah, and I guess that's also where the term fundies, that came out ages ago, fundies. Right. And I know that, and would you say that was always intended to be derogatory? Because that's the way I always kind of took it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I always took it as that. But yeah, and that's kind of where I got trendies too, because it's like, oh, if we're the fundies, you guys are the trendies, So we like to throw names. Because
right.
In the IFB world too, once we attach a label to you, then it's just real easy for us to, attack what that is. And we don't always deal with the individual and things. And that's something I want to just say too. When I referred to you guys as queer little maniacs, all right, that was definitely. It came off way more personal than I meant, if we're being. But at the same time, when I look at what I call the trendy crowd, I often refer to them as queer little trendies because of a lot of the clothing styles, hairstyles, mannerisms, personality. And I'm telling you right now, that's one of the big things that in the IFB that causes them to kind of be so hostile towards the other side is, the old crowd, we don't like that stuff. We don't like the weird hairdos and, the tight pants, bring up the skinny jeans all the time. I think a lot of that stuff's effeminate, and I think some of it's offensive. I think some of the people that are what I would call leaders in the trendy world are very flamboyant, and you hear these preachers all the time. I mean, you hear it on fake sermon and stuff. These guys talking about, these effeminate, sissy britches, skinny jean wearing. And, I think what we're doing in maybe our own misguided way is we're, fighting to preserve a culture that we're fighting against a culture that we just don't like. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think there's actually some truth to that, because I definitely know that some people just don't like that culture. For me, when I was in fundamentalism, the IFB, if you will, I'm still fundamentalist, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But when I was in there, for me it was this complete obsession though with like, oh, their hair, and I'm like, who cares about the hair? And then it was, oh, it was their purple shirt. I'm like, I don't care about, why is that? So for me, it was this whole, we're making a big deal about appearances when that, I know we were told to be modest. Mm-hmm. That's a biblical thing, but that deals a lot with like vanity and where you're trying to bring attention to. So for me, that was one of the things that I struggled with. It was like, okay, I don't really care about a lot of those little things, but I do understand wanting to preserve a culture. And I say this all the time. I have no problem with people having preferences. You and I were talking about that before. Yeah. I have no problem with a church that's like, no, we like a traditional feel. I had a friend of mine from my old IFB church over yesterday, and he said he likes the high church, all the pomp and circumstance, as he put it. And, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with having a more of a conservative style church, how you want to go about that. I have no problem people keep preaching out of the King James. I just have an issue when we're making it like, this is separation worthy, and also I'm going to keep demeaning these other Christians and believers just over appearances or cultural differences, right. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. And I do think that when it comes to a lot of the demeaning, and okay, we all follow IFB preacher clips and stuff, and we see the stuff that's said, and I've been to a lot of these meetings, but one thing that I think the other side often doesn't understand is that, when preachers get together in the IFB world, you are kind of trying to fire up your base And, there are things that aggravate us, and trends and things that we don't like. And so the conferences and things is a place to get that stuff off your chest. And so, it does tend to get a little extreme sometimes at these things as far as the stuff they're saying. I think it's important. One thing that, the people who follow the preacher clips thing, and I'll read some of the comments and responses to these things, and it's like, there's hardly any Bible in this preaching. You kind of hear the same things all the time. What does that have to do with the gospel? Well, the thing is, when a bunch of preachers get together, they're not there to preach doctrine. They're there to fire each other up. They're frustrated over just all the things they're dealing with in the ministry and all the junk that's going on in the religious world. And this is their time to just get together and have fun and
let it rip.
And let it rip, tater chip. And when they get up and they start, hammering on the, these, emergent church, new evangelical, hipster, skinny jean wearing, all that kind of stuff, we get fired up because, we don't like it. And so, yes, a lot of stuff gets said from the pulpit. There's no doubt about that, and a lot of it I think isn't fun. And you got to understand too, for the old crowd, a lot of these guys that are preaching that stuff, they grew up in a world where that preaching didn't always leave the four walls so much. I mean, yeah, they sold CDs and things like that, but typically you had to pay for them, so they didn't get out that much. And the people that were going to pay for them were people that actually agreed with them and wanted to listen to it. And so now we're kind of in a new era where everyone's hearing what we're saying. And so sometimes I don't think they kind of take into consideration how some of this stuff is going to come across and how it's going to be scrutinized and how it's going to be tore apart. And so that's why you see a lot of these guys doing a lot of really dumb stuff and just not changing on it too, because it's like they're oblivious to the fact this is going out on the internet. When John Hamlin's saying his prayer for the 8 millionth time verbatim, I don't think he realizes everybody's seeing this and is very turned off by it. But in his world, he's at a different church now. He's got a new audience, and it's been a year since they heard that. They're not going to remember, So I think the minds of a lot of people are in a different place than where ours are, and people my age, we understand the stuff's going out on the internet, and some of us, we say it anyway, hoping to take a poke at some of these
a hornet's
people.
Nest.
yeah, pretty much. But yeah, so I think most of these guys, if you sat down in person and talked with them, it'd be a lot different. But
oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I have actually had great conversations with some of these people who are very fire and brimstone and say crazy, obscene things.
Or you've even mentioned too, where you have these IFB pastors that don't even want to say these crazy things, but feel like they have to continue it because that's what their congregation wants. And there's almost this like peer pressure to keep the old paths trend in their church because they think if they don't, then they're going to lose people in their
I would
seats.
just argue that there's a healthier way to do it.
Yes.
That's my, keep the pomp and circumstance. You can keep your little more high church feel, more traditional feel. I'm cool with that. I just think if you beat down to what you do is you're alienating people that could even possibly really be needing the gospel. It could actually probably even use some of that tightropeness that the fundamentalism brings. Because I know a lot of people who have been highly addicted to things, horrible backgrounds, and they got into IFB, and the IFB is so strict in certain areas that it helped them learn some discipline. And I'm not saying there's never a place for any of it. It's just, I feel like sometimes there's a better way to do it than just ripping into other Christians. Right. And that was always my issue. It was like when I'd be there, and sometimes it was a good fun, and I would laugh because it was a funny joke. Other times I'd hear them like, ugh, that did not sit right. Like that was not a good way to hit that.
Well, I think we focus on some of the things that are they're extra biblical. They're applying preferences to other people. And I think we really recognize that it's so awesome when you're saved that you get to personally experience this sanctification, that you are choosing how to follow Christ the best way you can. You're picking things that, I'm not going to, I had porn issues before I was saved, so I'm not even going to have a cell phone. So I'm going to set that barrier for me. Or I'm not going to drink because my father was an alcoholic and I saw how bad that was, so I'm not going to do that for me. But where we have the problem is when we say, well, this standard is now also for you or for thee, if we're doing the King James explanation. But if you're putting your preferences at the same level as God, and you don't have a biblical foundation for it, you just have to extrapolate upon extrapolate. Like we were talking about skinny jeans and how we went from thigh to form of the thigh to anything that's even tight is now nakedness. It's like, well, we're really going down a long path to try to explain our preferences in a biblical way. And that's what we're trying to call out. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think you drive people away from the gospel when you do that.
That's fair.
Well, so I guess this is a good subject to kind of talk about for a little bit too, because, I hear what you guys are saying on a lot of this stuff, but here's the thing though, you often bring up the preferences, extra biblical standards and things like that. But I think it's safe to say, in my case, in my preaching, I don't feel like when I'm preaching a lot of standards that they're necessarily extra biblical. I think they're based off of Bible principle, and I'm applying them to today's situation and today's culture. And therefore, it is biblical, what we're preaching. So, for example, whenever you bring up Deuteronomy 22:5, and a woman should not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment. Well, I don't think for a second that, in Moses' day, they were dressing the way, we do today, the men or the women. But I do believe that when you go back, when, the principle applies that men and women should dress different. So how does that work today? How does that look? And so then when you see we're in a society too, where they're constantly trying to mix the genders, people don't even know what gender they are. You have all this unisex stuff.
Gender is a social construct or whatever.
Right. So it seems like, we should be more clear about these things than ever before, and, trying to make these distinctions and talking about these things. But the thing is, you can't just get up necessarily and say, here's what the verse says. I think you need to teach people how to apply it to today. I think because, when the Bible says, be not conformed to this world. Well, did that only mean that world 2,000 years ago? Or is that all the time? What does it mean? What does it look like to be conformed to the world now? And so we're looking at what the world's doing. We're looking at the direction things are going. And we're saying, hey, there's something wrong with this. I think we need to change some stuff. And so we preach hard on standards and say, this is what it looks like today. And I don't think it's, wrong to do that. I think, everybody follows man-made standards. Everybody, if I'm 5'9", okay, that's based on a man-made standard. Some men got together and decided what a foot is and what an inch is. And we have all come to accept, the 12 inches as a foot. It's not just anybody's foot. That's not, we've accepted a standard. And I think we're in a world today where people want no standards, but no, somebody's got to figure out what these things are. And, when it comes to things that are more spiritual and affect the spiritual life, who better to figure out what these things are than God's people? I know I'm not going to ask Hollywood and, the fashion industry what's male and female, because I'm seeing what they're doing. So when I look at good, godly people, and I'd rather hear what they have to say about what's godly and what's male and what's female. So I don't think these are necessarily extra biblical or, preferences. I think they're following Bible commands.
Yeah, I'll speak to that for a minute. I would say, yeah, especially like the whole, like, not confusing your identity, right? There's male and there's female. So you don't want to confuse the identity. My point would be the fact that certain things are clearly still like the feminine genes or women genes are very much still structured for a woman's body. And the same with men's. And then when I don't know exactly, like I said, I'm new to you. I've always actually, by the way, been told that you're very nice and that, so I'm not even kidding. Like, even though you've dropped, you've dropped mean things, but people have said that from our Fundy camp. Oh yeah, Tommy McCurtry's pretty nice guy. So high praise, I guess. I don't know, but you know, when it comes to these things, I don't know. Are you like a skirts and dresses kind of guy for the girls then?
Yes.
Okay, all right, cool. I just want to make sure I'm not speaking to something that I don't even need to speak to. So for me, it was like, okay, so women wear that, and I get it if you're looking at within like a European mindset, you know, this is how it was. But then when you get to China, women wore pants all the time. And then when you get to Scotland, men wore kilts, and that was considered masculine. And so what I was, when I started going, oh, not wearing that which pertains to a man or a woman would be wearing that which is considered masculine or feminine, not so much skirts and trousers, if that makes sense.
Right.
That's where I'm coming from there.
Yeah. I understand that. And I do think there is some, you know, validity to that to a certain extent. I do think when it comes to the pants issue, which is a super hot button issue. I mean, so many females,
For some reason.
Yeah. So many females are still recovering because they weren't allowed to wear pants growing up, which I don't understand why that was so tragic and why that was so hard. But, you know, that is something that really, you know, bothers them. But the thing is, yeah, I get it. If I saw a guy in a pair of ladies' pants, I'd think he was a homo. You know, I would think that was an abomination.
That'd probably be a fair deduction.
Right. But at the same time, you know, yes, they pertain or were made for. But the thing is, pants that are made for women, I don't think you make an argument that they're very modest. And so it's like, to me, it's the pants issue. Yes, I do think, you know, pants have historically been known as a masculine thing. And so, you know, pants for the guys for that reason. But then even if you get into what are considered feminine pants today, I don't think they're modest. And so then I think you're out of line with modesty. And again, you know, we are taught in the Bible, you know, women are to adorn themselves in modest apparel. What does that, you know, look like today? You know, how do you do that today? And I think godly people are the best people to consult on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on the pants. Like, I mean, it's, yeah, some pants are definitely immodest. I think that's inarguable. That would be indefensible for me to claim otherwise. But I definitely, like, my wife, she wears perfectly modest pants. She's actually very mindful. She's probably more mindful than even I am. When we were first married, it was kind of one of those funny things. I'm like, oh, I think that looks fine. She's like, I don't like it because of this. I was, oh, I didn't even notice that. So I think it just kind of depends on the situation. But I mean, so I think culture dictates some of those things. But that's my position. Obviously, you have yours. And you know, maybe yours is just. I would say, my view would be that that IFB position is almost an overcorrection, if that makes sense. And I think that's why some of the girls probably feel terrible and they have a hard time recovering, quote unquote, from it. Is an overcorrection, so they feel overly restricted. I mean, I can't really speak to that. I'm a man, so.
And I don't know, we're in Michigan. I feel bad for any girl that's got to wear a dress in the middle of winter.
That's true. We had a snowstorm today.
That's freaking cold. You know, I'm putting on 2 layers of pants and maybe some Carhartts, and I'm still freezing. So if I was being forced to wear dresses, I would be mad. I'm just saying, women, I get it.
Right. Well, and you know, the thing is too, I think when it comes to the IFB world, one of the problems that they've had is the enforcement mechanisms that have been used. Because, you know, I mean, I don't talk about pants
I'd agree with that,
that much in church. And the thing is, we don't enforce anything. You know, we don't kick ladies out of our church if they wear pants out in public, or even if they come to church in a pair of pants. You know, I don't get up and call them whores and, you know, transvestites and things like that. You know, I know some people do that. Yeah, I don't do that. I understand that, you know, most people, they're just following the culture, you know, and I don't think they're a terrible person because of it. But at the same time, in the IFB world, I think what created a lot of trouble is you had with the Christian school movement and the Bible college movement, they had all these rules. If you're going to come to the school, you had to agree to this, you had to agree to that. And so they were literally forcing people to dress in ways that they didn't believe in, and it forced people to be fake. And so when it comes to, you know, our standards,
yeah.
But yeah, so when it comes to standards, you know, in our church, I preach on standards, but you know, this is the way I do it. I get up and I'll let it rip from the pulpit. I'll share what I believe from the Bible, but then I leave it at that. I don't bother people. I don't harass people. I try to let the Holy Spirit deal with them. And so we don't have a Christian school. We don't have a lot of these other things. And so there's really nothing to enforce. And I don't feel like, I have a right to do that anyway. And so, and the truth is, I don't want people doing things just because of me. I want them to do it for the right reasons. And so the thing is, there are a lot of women that believe that they should dress this way, and a lot of men who believe in these standards, and there's a lot of people who practice them and do not believe in it, and they're often the ones that are going around trying to enforce it in the church, because if we have to do it, they've got to do it too. Well, if you really believe it, who cares what everybody else is doing? And so the problem is, a lot of these people that are coming out of our way are people who were forced to be fake. And so now it's like everybody's just fake, and I don't think that's right either. No, some of us really believe in these things, and, and so I think that's where a lot of the problem was. I think the way it's been enforced over the years has been out of line. There's been a lot of, just nasty peer pressure in a lot of churches. I mean, if a woman got caught by one of the church members out wearing pants at Walmart or something like that, she's going to be talked about, and she knows it. And so that's another reason too. You try to keep the gossip out of the church and things like that, and tell people to mind their own business, and that way you don't that way you don't create that environment. And so I think a lot of people associate what I think are good things, like dress standards and music standards, whatever. They associate it with a lot of bad stuff, because there was a lot of junk in churches. But you're just gonna have a tough time convincing me a lot of these things were, that they're bad or wrong.
And that's why I always tell people, never sin against your conscience. I know plenty of women who are like, well, I really feel this is the way I should dress. I'm like, okay, cool. Then don't sin against your conscience. I've mentioned that multiple times. I think, and that's the problem. Like you said, the enforcement mechanism, I think, is a huge issue. And you kind of nailed it. It forced people to be fake. And you've heard me talk about that. Yeah. So I was like, when you show up, because you agree with the doctrine, right? So, you go to this IFB college. I like the doctrine. I like these distinctives. I like these things. And then you go there, but they're like, nope, this is the cookie cut. You have to behave. And I guess that's where we got wrong in our response video, because I mentioned when it came to diversity, you were talking about diversity amongst your guys' styles of IFB preachers. And I was like, well, the IFB is always enforcing this. And I guess you're right. It's more the colleges and schools enforcing this type of standard. And, because my pastor growing up would be more considered along that nature. He would speak about things, but then he wouldn't be enforcing it into people's homes and stuff. He would just let God kind of work through that, however God saw it. So anyway.
Yeah, and the Bible. Go ahead.
I was just saying, we just don't want to split, hence the name, split on preferences. I think it's ridiculous when you see this is like a massive problem in the American church, and I think you probably have some issues with a lot of the evangelicals doing the same thing, splitting over really ridiculous standards that they're saying are biblical but are not, or it's their preference and something happened that's affecting their preference on that or their perspective on it. We just don't think you should be splitting over it. You don't see churches in Acts, you don't see churches in the New Testament splitting over dumb issues. You have Paul calling out people that were not preaching the gospel. And I think we've just lost all track of focusing on the gospel because we're focusing on jeans or music. And we're like, okay, there's this culture over there that we really don't like, and we're just going to run so far away from it that we're losing people. We're actually forcing people to go to progressive Christian churches or become atheists because they have such a horrible experience with judgmental Christians. And I don't have a problem with judging, but I'm just saying when it just becomes so obnoxious, like you can't be in church because you're wearing jeans, or you can't do this because, you pulled out an ESV Bible or something stupid. It's just like, come on, guys. There's so many more things that are against the church than these little preferences. And I just don't think that we should be fighting over them. And that's why we're trying to call it out, because we don't think it's right.
Right. Well, yeah, on one hand, I can agree with some of what you said. On the other hand, though, some of these things are very important to us. Like for example, the Bible version issue, you got to understand that is very important to a lot of us, and, Will, I know you're from an IFB background. That's a big deal, and
about 4 King James Bibles sitting on my shelf over there from the past. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I still use them, by the way.
Right. So the thing is,
just not worth splitting over.
Right. Well, yeah. And so while that's your position on that, it is for the IFB world, that is something we hold very near and dear. And for the very reason too, that, I feel like it's hard to find common ground with somebody because when they don't believe, we have a perfect Bible. Because to me, I think everybody would say, hey, I believe the Bible, I believe it's the Word of God and all that. But then it's like, if you believe there's mistakes and it's not perfect, then it's like, I don't feel like we could ever come to any resolution on anything where it's like, if you really do believe the Bible, if I can show you enough, and if I can, then you're going to come around. But if you don't even believe what we have is authoritative or that it's flawed, then it just seems like we're probably never going to get anywhere. And so that's, in the IFB world, you're just not going to convince, most people in it that are King James only that this is not an issue we're splitting over. And so,
that's too bad.
And I think this is probably one of these areas where we're going to disagree, and because I'll say too, when it comes to a lot of, the standards and things like that, I might, I can still be friends with some people. There's people at Idea Day that, I still consider friends. And it's just like, I don't agree with them going there. You know what? They don't like some of the meetings that I go to and some of the preachers I hang out with. And, they're not going to come preach at my church. They're not going to invite me to come preach at their church. But if they were in town, I go out to dinner with them. I'm friendly with them. But it's like I think the reason we're seeing so much fighting going on, though, is because in the IFB world where, we do believe in these old paths that, we consider old paths, hashtag old paths, whatever you want to call them, the standards, the King James Bible, all these things that we're not changing on, we're seeing a lot of change happening, and we're constantly losing people, to the other side on these things. And these things are important to us. And so when you have groups out there that, literally, have podcasts dedicated to trying to pull people out of our camp, there's going to be some hostility towards that. And
sure.
And then too, when you start see them changing on things that you could say, I would admit are somewhat preferential, even though I think they're important, if their music standards become a little more liberal than I do, if their auditorium look becomes a little more modern, one thing that I think we've all seen is that it always starts with a lot of those little things. And then before you know it, the big things start happening, and it's a big thing in the IFB world when a guy loses his King James Bible, and I think it's always going to be a big deal for our crowd when that happens. But
oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But that, and I'm somebody too, who is not the most popular guy in the IFB world because I'm different on. I'm different on eschatology.
You're post-trib, right?
Yeah, I'm a post-trib pre-wrath guy. Yeah. I believe in replacement theology, but yet, when it comes to my practices and how our church is and our music and all that, I'm very old paths. And the thing is, I get it that pre-trib thing is very important to these people, and so. While I don't think it's worth breaking fellowship over, I have pre-trib people come preach for me. It's not the other way around, but at the same time, I understand where they're coming from. And so, sometimes we just have to just admit that, we've got these differences. We're just not going to be able to fellowship. And I've had some people that I like a lot who I've invited to come preach for me, and they don't want to, and I don't know if it's the pre-trib stuff, my position in Israel, things like that. And it's like, I'm disappointed. I think they're wrong on their position. I even think they're wrong on their response and not wanting to fellowship with me. But here's one thing I would not do. I would never go and try to, attack their church and go after their church and try to get their people to leave that church and come to one like mine or come to mine, over something, like end times, where that's something I don't think it's worth breaking fellowship over, but a lot of them do. And I get it. And I think, you guys, and maybe Will more because of the background you're from, I would think you would get, not people breaking fellowship over the King James issue because.
Well, I understand the King James issue pretty thoroughly, as I was staunch on it. In fact, I just talked to my friend the other day who one of the last things I said when we hung out was, I was like, I'm never moving from this position. This is never going to move. And more I studied, I moved. That's why we on our channel we have an entire playlist of me discussing the issue. It's like 12, 8 episodes. How many?
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
I had to watch it all.
But no, I definitely understand why some of these things. You're kind of speaking to what we talk about. Like you're saying that your eschatology difference shouldn't break fellowship. I agree. Someone's view on eschatology shouldn't split things. And that's kind of why the point of what we're doing is like, okay, well, some of these things are things that people have debated about for the last 2,000 years in Christianity, if you go all the way back. So there's no sense in splitting over some of this. We can still have fellowship, like before I even met with you, there's people telling me not to get on tonight to talk with you because of, you're on a vastly different side of the aisle than me. And I'm like, well, if he believes in Jesus Christ, same as me, I feel like we can have some sort of fellowship, at least get to know each other, even if we disagree. And that's the point of the church split, is trying to unite the body through our differences even. And sometimes have a good solid debate and then walk away and give each other knuckles and say, hey, love you, bro. I still think you're wrong.
Right.
That's the Jews did, right? They were constantly debating each
the
other.
Jews did
And they
do
were
that a lot.
they were very argumentative and still are. And I think we both are kind of argumentative too. But the point is, I think if we discuss something openly, we're accepting that there is such thing as objective truth. And if we discuss it long enough and with enough focus on what we would consider objective truth standards like the Bible, then we should be able to find the truth. And I just think when we ignore that and go, no, I'm right, I'm not changing, or there's no way that you're right and I'm wrong, I think we lose a lot. And I think like the King James only thing, I think you lose a lot of the textual criticism arguments for the supremacy of the Bible by excluding so much of the basic texts that build a lot of the translations. And I think we're just spoiled as English people when we have so many different English translations that we're splitting over, and there's other countries that don't have a Bible in their language at all.
To be fair, we have garbage translations. I do want to say that.
There are some really bad.
The Message Bible and the Passion Translation need to go, man.
But you
we
can
can
see
at least
that
find common ground there.
but you can see that because you can compare them, and I think that's something that
that's true.
we're so lucky to have that we don't even realize.
Right. Well, the thing is too, though, there's a lot of doctrinal, issues too. And so the thing is, you can get really bogged down with the, the debate and the fighting and all that kind of stuff. And so the thing is, I feel like the doctrinal differences in the world are growing. I would credit a lot of that to all the new translations of the Bible, because now, if you don't like what one Bible says, you can find something that probably says more along the lines of what you want it to say. And so, it just, I don't know, I feel like I'm wasting my time if, spending a whole lot of time with somebody if they don't have that belief, we kind of need to be on the same page there. Now, don't get me wrong. I talk to people a lot who disagree with me on a lot of things, because one thing that I try to do too, if I'm preaching against another position, I preached a series of messages about a year ago on talking about against preterism and stuff. And so before I did that, I wanted to make sure I understood a lot of their positions. And so I talked to, I think, 3 or 4 different people who held that position, and we had some really good conversations. Some of the people I talked to, I thought, these are saved people, these are my brothers, but they're off on some stuff. There were some that I talked to, I'm like, man, there is no way that person's saved. And not just because they're wrong on, end times, but just some of the beliefs they had, it was just horrible. But the thing is, when it comes to certain subjects, it's just like, some of the difference are just too big. And it's like, I'm not saying they're all lost and not my brother or anything like that, but it's like, when it comes to some things, it's like, I just don't really want to waste a lot of time with that person. And so, some stuff I'll leave them alone. So for example, too, I think I've seen from your program too, you're dispensational, and I'm, well, I saw you had a guy doing dispensational videos.
Yeah. We have different people come on, so okay. I haven't said what my position is on any of those things yet. I'm waiting to do that.
But yeah, so like me, I'm non-dispensational. I don't like dispensationalism at all. But the thing is, there's a lot of people who would consider themselves dispensational to a certain extent that, I'd still fellowship with, and I'd even let them come preach for me. There's certain lines I draw. When they start teaching different ways of salvation in the Old Testament versus the New Testament, and another way of salvation in the tribulation, then it's like, all right, I don't want to have anything to do with you. And so, but then there's some too, like the ones that are just kind of the law, the church, the kingdom. They kind of have those three divisions. I can put up with a lot of that stuff, but even with some, where I disagree with them, I would never treat them so much like an enemy, but I'm not really going to look to fellowship with a lot of them too. You know what I'm saying? Because again, I just don't want to get too tied up to people that I feel are going in the wrong direction. We just have too many differences. I don't think, to me, it seems like when the bodies start uniting, I see more compromise. It seems like too, and I'm speaking, I'm broad brushing here, but in people, what I would call the trendy camp, I think they're uniting way too much with too many people. And it seems like it all leads back to, they all want to get that Protestant connection. It's like they're still, I think they still believe in the mother church, and that the Catholic Church just went wrong somewhere, and that they're, but I'm like, no, we're totally separate from that. But it seems like with
to be fair, they probably call us trendies.
What's that?
To be fair, the Catholic Church probably calls us trendies. So
yeah, maybe, but yeah, but I mean, I think, don't you agree though? There's just some differences that you can say, all right, we've got these are big deals. Maybe I don't want to be your enemy. I don't want to fight with you, but we can't be buddy. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I think that, there are definitely some lines, and I think we would agree with the lines are those that are based in Scripture. That our issue is only the lines that are not. And I think too, we're called to, through the Great Commission, to reach out to people that don't agree with us at all, right? I see a lot more differences between me and an atheist than me with a Methodist. So, I think we should be reaching out, and I think there's a lot of unity, and I think Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians about, hey, it's not playing card apostles here, like, oh, I'm a Paul guy, I'm an Apollos guy. Like he says, we're all building on the same foundation. And I think we're doing the same thing that the Corinthian church was doing, is they were just fighting over which man of God were they following. And I think that's where we see a lot of the problems.
I would say there are some obviously things to divide over. I mean, obviously, like someone denying the deity of Christ, that's going to be really, really tough to have. Like, okay, yeah, but at church we recognize the deity of Christ, so why are you here? Yeah. But the other thing, but for me, I wouldn't say like, I would still befriend these people, because a lot of times I've been able to influence people. In fact, I'll mention that. I won't mention her name, but we had a person who was, we've been very harsh on progressive Christianity.
Yes, extremely.
Very harsh on progressive Christianity, because it is heresy. So to put it bluntly, so we've been very harsh in our podcast and on our channel. And this girl came who was a progressive Christian, and she was not thrilled. And so we went back and forth, commented, exchanged. I sent her our email. Long story short, and I mean, this was a person who was openly bisexual, the whole nine. I mean, you are talking progressive Christian. And through us, we're like, oh, hey, look, let's try to befriend you. We're definitely going to disagree, and I will tell you every single time I disagree with you, out of love. And she just repented of it all, like 2 days ago, and got eaten alive by her woke brothers and sisters, essentially. But she repented of all of it, and was like, nope, I have to pursue Christ, and what God says is true. So I feel like if we push too far away from people we disagree with, we lose the opportunity to to do that. And I guess it just depends where you take separation. I guess some IFB take separation as let's create our own little protective bubble. And other ones go, well, I'll be your friend, but I can't be close friends with you where you edify me because I'm basically discipling and mentoring you. So I guess depends how you slice the pie.
Right. Well, shouldn't a call to unity though be a call to agreeing on specific, some specific things, because obviously you mentioned the deity of Christ, and and so the thing is, we can't have unity with somebody who denies the deity of Christ. You can't have unity with somebody who teaches another form of salvation. And so it just seems like though, and maybe in your camp, there's just fewer things that you think are necessary and would consider secondary, where, I think some of us still think they're important.
I don't even know if it'd be fewer things. I think it's just
or different things,
biblical things.
Yeah, or like ours is like orthodoxy, like the very fundamentals of the faith. What are the most fundamental things of the faith? Virgin birth, deity of Christ, salvation through faith, faith and all that stuff. But those would be like our fundamentals.
But how about then inspiration of the scriptures? Because again, if we don't have perfection in our scriptures, then we don't have inspiration. How can the man of God be perfect, truly furnished, if we have a flawed message, if we have an incomplete message? So to me, right up there with the deity of Christ and all these other things, and a lot of people give lip service to the inspiration of scriptures. Well, I believe they're inspired in the originals, but we don't have the originals. But and here's something I guess I've wanted to ask people from the non-KJV crowd. I've never asked anybody this question before. It's something I thought of recently. But do you believe that in Jesus's day, when he was on earth, that they had a perfect Hebrew Old Testament still?
Wow. Ooh, there's a few things to unpack there. So one, I would say, okay, first I'll answer the one about Jesus, then I'll go over here. Okay. And Jesus, he did quote from a few of different sources back then. I would say that, the Jews were methodical about keeping record. That's why the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are ancient, even match much later Hebraic copies. They were just so meticulous at it. So I would say, if anyone had access to it, it'd be back then. And I still, for the most part, there's it seems like there's the least in the manuscript history variations in Hebrew and the Aramaic, because again, those are mostly held by the Jews. And when things get crazy is where you see the biggest variations is usually the New Testament writings. And that's because it exploded, the resurrection of Christ exploded the ancient world. And so it went all over the place, and illiterate people were even copying back and forth certain things. So that's why we have over 25,000 manuscripts that we can trace all the way back to within 50 years of the resurrection-ish. And that's why I say my position is the fact that not that we don't have an infallible scripture. That we would, and the trendy camp, I'll use your term, would say that no, we have infallible scripture. The thing is that what we do is we build it up from all the manuscript history, and then we go, these are the oldest ones, these are the majority ones. Where do they harmonize each other? And so it's more like, and I guess that's where the whole King James and whatever debate comes. The majority text, the one where the most is best, or oldest is best, because the oldest have the less in it. So there are certain phrases that are completely not in there. And then the majority text has added things. And most scholars agree that people tend to add over time to harmonize as opposed to remove. Now, that's probably debate for another time, but that would be my
Okay. Well, because I guess the thing is, I think it's pretty clear they would have had, a completed perfect scripture. When Jesus is saying things, not one jot or tittle is going to pass from the law to all be fulfilled. That just kind of implies that, hey, everything that's there in the scripture, you can trust that it's going to come to pass. And the thing is, if they even had a perfect Bible, Old Testament in Jesus' day, that was a great miracle when you consider all that took place in Israel, the fact their temple was destroyed and all of the sieges they had been under, and the fact that they, succeeded in preserving those scriptures, it was a great thing. It was a miracle. It was a miracle. And I believe very strongly in the miracle of preservation. I think it had to be done. And I
agree.
And I do think, though, I think the evidence, and, obviously we don't want to go too deep in it. The evidence is that it's in the King James Bible. But so the thing is, for those who do strongly believe that, that is going to be a foundational thing. And it's just like, if you don't even believe Jesus is God, then there's just no reason to continue on with this. And it's like, if you have a problem with our book, it's just like, I don't really see how we can have fellowship. And I don't
What if they speak a different language, though?
What if they speak a different language? Well, the thing is,
you had the guy from South Africa 2 days ago.
Well, it doesn't mean he's not a brother. I mean, I think he's got to use the best what he has. And, like I said, I don't think everybody who's not King James only isn't saved, but I think they're heading in the wrong direction. That's the thing that I think. And so it's like, we're seeing so much apostasy going on in the world. We're seeing so many people, leaving, fundamentalism, old paths or whatever. And so the thing is, it all seems like one of the big things it hinges around is the, King James issue. And so the thing is, when you see people go in the wrong direction, you're going to get freaked out. Where there's other people, they just haven't been taught any better. I believe they're saved. I mean, we go out soul winning every week, and we talk to people from other churches all the time that aren't King James only, and these people give really solid salvation testimonies. I believe they're saved. I'd be nice to them, but it's like, when you start teaching that something's wrong, I got a big problem with that. And so people in other countries, I think they need to use whatever the best is that they have, but I also think it's going to be harder for them, not having a perfect, translation. I think
how do they get one? I'm sorry, that was
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's for people that are
that's
people that are smarter than me. Obviously, I
only was inspired.
I only know English, so I'm not the best one to speak on that.
I dumb American.
Yeah. If the Holy Spirit, this is the thing that bothers me. If the Holy Spirit is strong enough to inspire the King James only translation, the King James Bible, isn't he also powerful enough to inspire a, I don't know, Swahili Bible?
Well, the thing is, it's not like the King. I don't believe like the Ruckmanites, where the King James, got like another source of inspiration. I just believe if you accurately translate something that's inspired, then you still have that inspiration. So, if a Spanish Bible is accurately translated, it's going to be inspired too. And so, the thing is, when it comes to even so, some of the older English Bibles, like the Bishop's Bible and stuff, that were good translations.
I was about to ask you about them. Yeah,
I think people were getting saved from those. Even though they might have had some issues somewhere, but at the same time, I think those were kind of building blocks to get us to where we are. And so the thing is, though, when there's obvious flaws, you got to fix it. And I don't see that happening with these other versions, where you can find clear contradictions right there, within their own pages. And I don't think you can do that in a King James Bible. I know people say they do all the time, but I don't think there's any contradictions. I think the fact that there are no contradictions in it, I think that's just proof that God put his stamp of approval on it and his Holy Spirit's all over it, because, the Bible, God's word isn't going to contradict itself. And so when you have all these other versions contradicting themselves, then it's like, all right, we got a problem here. And so when it comes to some countries and some languages, unfortunately, because those countries are just so dead and there's not much gospel witness there's not much effort put into translating those Bibles. And it shows in the culture. And I think we often see improvements in countries whenever they get them. I believe it was the King James that is the reason we got out of the Dark Ages. From what I understand, they're saying that the Reign of Valera 2010 is like a perfect Bible now. I don't know. But at the same time, if it is, I personally believe we're going to see a lot of wonderful things happen in the Spanish-speaking world, because of the fact that they've got something that's pure. And so I think what we're seeing in our country religiously is we're seeing everything fall apart, and I attribute it to these other versions of the Bible.
See, I would say so. A couple things on that is so. I mean, the King James version was considered the liberal Bible before the Geneva. I mean, after the Geneva. So everyone's like Geneva Bible only as back in the day.
Old pass.
Yeah, that was their old pass. And my thing is, it's like, so I have a hard time first off believing that the Bible's only preserved in the King James for English speaking people in the last 400 years. So like we didn't really have a good Bible beforehand. That's one of those issues. Also, how we got the King James deals with the Textus Receptus, which was Textus Receptus, which is compiled of less than a dozen manuscripts. And then you get to like now where we have like 25,000 manuscripts. It's like, well, I think we have more things to pull from to see if things were added to, if scribes got something wrong. And I guess that's my position. But I guess we'll have to agree to disagree on that.
Yeah.
So
and
I mean,
we're gonna find. Yeah, we could talk about this issue all night, but I guess.
But I will.
Go ahead.
I will say, I do understand why IFB, especially because if that's with what they believe, I do understand why they separate it. And that was actually one of the things for me. That was the last leg. I was like, then once I studied, I was like, I don't think this holds up, but I do understand why. And also I have no problem with the King James. And that's why I've gone to plenty of churches. My church, one of my good friends, he uses the King James, preaches out of the King James, and he's not a King James only uses, but he uses it. I'm neutral if somebody wants to use the King James because I still find it fine. A good translation, obviously. I mean, that thing is amazing. What was done with just a few manuscripts is highly impressive. I will just say that.
Props. Yes.
Props.
Good Anglican.
So. Yeah. And so I guess the main point I'm trying to make is I would definitely, and I think as well as many other people in the IFB, would add to just some of the musts that have to be there in that call to unity is on this, issue of the King James. And so, and again, there's people out there that, they're in the camp where they mainly use the King James, they believe in the inspiration in the originals and, they're King James preferred. And it's like, I'm not necessarily looking to just go fight with all these people and make enemies out of them and stuff like that. But at the same time, too, I'm not going to have close fellowship with them.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the King James only issue for a lot of the IFB as well. If it's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing. It's like, well, this has worked for us for X amount of years. It's reliable, it's dependable. It's a little weird to get used to all the these, thys, and giveths and all of that. And like I said, I have no qualms with the King James. In fact, when I did my King James only series on my channel, I had a lot of people go, "You just hate the King James." Like, no, I actually have more King James in my house.
Calm down.
Yeah, calm down. Than anything else. I'm just not a King James onlyist, especially of the vein of the Ruckmanites, which thank the Lord that you're not. So because the Ruckmanites is wow, you need a study on the Ruckmanites. You don't know them very well. You need to look into it. It's a trip.
I see enough crazy, but I think you're making a big leap in logic though when you say, well, when we see people running away from the church, it's because they lost the King James version. I think that's just one straw in many. And I think you see a lot of people that might take a step away from the IFB that are still very focused on the fundamentals of the faith and might not have the King James. And I think it's an extrapolation that doesn't play out logically, but I think when you do hold so many of these preferences so tight and their grip is so strong that when something slips out, you're like, oh, it was because of the King James version. It was because they put genes on. And I think it's illogical. And I think that's where I see the disunity problem. And I think when you squeeze so tight, when you're applying your preferences to other people, that's when you see them go. It's not because they lost the King James. It's because you were trying to force your preferences on them.
I generally say extremes make weak Christians.
Yes.
So extreme conservatism makes weak Christians because they're protecting a little bubble. They had a certain ideology. And then when we got in the real world, it fell apart. And when they looked into certain things, it kind of fell apart. But then you go to extreme, like fluffy evangelical, what does Jeff Durbin call it? The evangelifish. That's funny. I don't care who you are. That's funny. You go there to this all love and just feel good, right? And I'm like, okay, I feel both of and this one just creates people who are ill-equipped. Now, I will say that in the fundies, like the fundies crowd, if we can use that term, I prefer calling it the IFB because I feel like fundies is too derogatory. I have a lot of friends still in the IFB, so whatever. But at least they create good, strong doctrine. Sometimes we get too far over in the progressive stuff. It gets a little too watered down for my preference, and I think it gets bad.
Right. I think shed some of the preferences, and man, you guys really got it. Honestly, I don't hate the IFB. I think it's just some of these preferences are getting in the way of the gospel.
Well, especially maybe the presentation with some of it.
Yeah.
As you already talked about.
Well, and I do think that's one of the areas too where sometimes we need to talk, because there are just definitely differences in some of our words and terminology. You would consider some of these preferences, we're not going to accept that, that's a preference, and so it's like, it's one of those areas where we just draw the line. We just have, we say, this is where we're different. And so, if maybe you add, when you're talking about us and our position on King James only, while to you it's a preference, I think there needs to be some recognition to the fact that to them, it's not a preference in their mind. It is a fundamental.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah, even if you don't agree.
I think they come by it honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I don't think they're doing it because they just want to control people. And I don't agree with, how the atheists will say that, religion was just made up to control people. I don't think that's it at all. Mm-hmm. But I think it's all coming out of a very strong sense of trying to follow in Christ. Mm-hmm. Why I would call it a preference is because you can't point to the Bible where it says the King James Version is the inspired word of God.
Yeah, and that's an argument that
I guess only.
Yeah, and I keep wanting to keep going on this, but I do kind of. We probably should.
It's a fun topic. So
yeah,
sorry.
But,
we should probably move on.
The thing is, let's move on, because I don't want to open another can of worms there. But
we can always have a return conversation. Just talk about the textual issue. That'd
right?
be fine.
Yeah,
I
maybe
really don't care about the issue. I just find it interesting.
Right. Well, because something I did want to talk about, I really want to make sure we get to this, because is the preaching differences, the topical preaching, expository preaching. Yeah. I think that could be a fun one. And I think there's probably a lot of stuff that we would agree with on that. But I know that was one of the things we mentioned in emails that we were wanting to talk about. Yeah. So, IFB preaching. Okay. And your crowd, and again, when I'm talking about your crowd, I found out about you guys, kind of through Twitter, and I follow a lot of, originally it was kind of the IFB Preacher Clips one. I've always enjoyed that account. I got blocked by them again. Very disappointed. I didn't even do anything to them. I haven't argued with them in a long time, but they got mad at me when I was going after JC Groves the other day. But anyway, I see a lot of the, there's a lot of criticism that I see on there. And so that's kind of where I've connected everybody, and how I found out about the Recovering Fundamentalists, and how I found about you guys and some of the other ones, podcasts and things that are out there. So I'll admit there's some bad preaching on there. There's some really bad preaching. I will also say, though, that a lot of the preaching on there is very misunderstood preaching. So maybe a way we can kind of go into this, because I don't know how much time you guys have. I was kind of hoping maybe to go to at least till 7:30, but
that's cool.
I'm in no big hurry. But I guess, what are your guys' main issues with IFB preaching?
All right,
when it's wrong, just kidding.
Point I, number A. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, funny. Growing up, being independent fundamental Baptist, my pastor was excruciatingly expository, very doctrinal. In fact, when I went to Bible college, I just aced Bible doctrine, and everyone's like, "I'm learning so much." I'm like, "I'm bored," because my pastor was so good at teaching it. I just had it nailed down. But then I went to Fairhaven and heard a whole nother level of certain things. Not all the time, but just depended who was behind the pulpit. And that's one of the things that I try not to broad brush the entire IFB, because I know that there's variations. But sometimes it's the shallow topical things. It's just I'm going to sit here and talk for an hour and a half on skirts and pants.
Mm-hmm.
And when I leave church, I'm not like, wow, I was edified today. Okay, I mean, even if you have the skirts and pants position, which I don't, but I know you do, which is fine. I'm not going to sit here and argue. We already talked about that. But even if that, it's like hour and a half talking about just that issue. Isn't this where you should wrap around at some point to your identity in God, what God calls men and women, what your role is as a man and a woman, and just like kind of bring it into round to something a bit more applicable to me when I'm at home? Say my wife already wears skirts. What did I learn? I learned nothing. I just got to sit there and browbeat for an hour and a half. So sometimes it's just, or, you know, the music thing, they'll sit there and blast music, and some people can't even live up to their own music standards, which as a musician, I found incredibly annoying. That was actually the music was the number one thing that got me to start leaving from the IFB, because no one, just like they were like, oh, this syncopation is all wrong. I'm like, syncopate? Plenty of things are syncopated. Even our hymns are syncopated. And so, you know, as a musician, I was like, this doesn't make sense. And those were some of the things. So I guess the shallowness of the preaching, and then the name calling of other IFB organizations. Like when I was at Fairhaven, they bashed Hiles, and I didn't understand it. I was, but
Same team, guys.
yeah, I thought we were the same team. Like, so things like that, where it's just like, why are we attacking people behind the pulpit? Isn't this where we're supposed to be learning about the Word of God? Why are we just preaching shallowly for an hour and a half on a small issue? It'd be one thing if it was an issue that wasn't really addressed often, but it was like a lot. So those are some of my issues. Go ahead and wax eloquently.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that there too, because I was kind of wanting to ask you about this. Fairhaven, I've known a lot of people from that college. I've always liked them, and they've, you know, all the ones that I've known. But Fairhaven people have always hated me, and I've never known why. I mean, and I'm talking about like before I was Post-Trib.
Maybe they preached against you.
Well, the thing is, it was before I was even on YouTube, and anybody knew who I was. It was like I've always had a tough time getting to know these guys, and are they like just really exclusive there, or do they just
I was going to say, it's because it's an exclusive club. It's very, I know a lot of good people there. I saw, I saw one of the guys, not Vogelin, he was on Preacher Clips, but another guy at Fairhaven, and he's such a good guy. Like, and it was on Preacher Clips, and just, some people get really nasty on Twitter. Some guy went after you over something stupid, and I'm not sure if you even saw it, but I defended you on that, because they were saying basically that all this money you paid for a studio, you should give it to the poor. And I was like, shut up. Yeah, that's a dumb art. Stop it.
You're doing this from a smartphone. Ironic.
Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, it's very exclusive, and they look, I mean, when they're talking that Hiles Anderson doesn't have high enough standards, and I'm like, I don't know many places stricter than Hiles Anderson and Fairhaven. Like, they have very similar, strict tightrope. So I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, I said I always had a tough time getting to know them, and I try to be friends, and it was just, they're always real standoffish. And then kind of when I got real suspicious, it was a couple years ago, I was reading a book by a guy from Fairhaven. I won't say his name. This happened in private, but I was reading his book. I was enjoying it. I was sitting in an airport, and I looked him up on Facebook, found him. I sent him a friend request, and I just sent him a message saying, "Hey, reading your book, really enjoying it. Keep up the good work." People like to just trying to throw some encouragement his way. Yeah. Well, he responded with, "Glad you liked the book, but I'll bet you wouldn't like what I have to say about Steven Anderson and blah blah blah." And I was like, I didn't even know the guy knew who I was. And he just immediately responded with that. He didn't have time to look me up on Facebook and see what I've been sharing or anything like that. And I was just like, what in the world? And then recently, one not far from me, he was fighting the mayor over having services and stuff, and took a strong stand. And, we were happy for him. And so we found out he was having a revival meeting. He sent me an email telling me about the revival meeting, because I had sent him an email just encouraging him. And then so I told the guys in our church, hey, let's go to his meeting. He was having a Fairhaven guy, of course. So let's go there and just encourage him. I appreciate the stand he's been taking. And so one of our guys emailed him, told him we were going to be coming. He told us not to, because he doesn't want to fellowship with Post-Trib people and stuff. And I'm just like, what in the world? So I was like, what is wrong with that place? And those aren't the only experiences, but it's like, maybe they just have super high standards about fellowship and stuff. So
Trust me, as a student there, I only went there one semester. I was like, I see the writing on the walls. I'm going to get kicked out of this place eventually. There's just no way I'm going to be able to do this. And
I've tried to be nice to him.
You actually kind of, touched on some of the things that some of the issues right there is like the exclusivity of some of it. And, if you're not part of my camp or you're part of that camp, I just got so tired of it. It felt like a bunch of petty children like squabbling half the time. And I was so disinterested in all of that and just wanted to, I was over it.
Yeah. But yeah. And so I guess back to the shallow preaching.
Yeah. Back to that.
Yeah. I can't deny there's not some really shallow preaching, but in defense, I guess, of what, some of the shallow preaching is, I think a lot of times, like when the clips are out there and stuff that everybody's sharing, I think you have to take into consideration the setting. Again, is this at a camp meeting? Is it at a preacher's conference where they're just firing up the bass and having fun? I mean, to me, if it's a Tuesday morning and you're in church with a bunch of preachers, I think you can lower the standard a little bit about what you talk about and how much scripture you use and just get up there and have fun, I don't think that's necessarily wrong, except unless you're actually preaching heresy, and then I think too, a lot of the preachers that are known for just really shallow preaching, I've heard, now I don't know, because obviously I don't go to all these people's churches, but, let's take a Tony Hudson, for example. I've heard some pretty goofy stuff come from him before. And one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of the clips that people share of him, he's preaching at other churches. It's probably a revival meeting. It's probably a preacher's fellowship. So the chances of a lost person being in church, on Tuesday morning is probably pretty rare, or, a Thursday night, he's firing up the bass. So I've heard some people like him, on a Wednesday night actually does, get deep into doctrine. I kind of have a tough time imagining that, but, usually in the IFB world, you have more of like an evangelistic sermon during the morning service. You have something more, practical daily living on Sunday night. You got something more of an in-depth Bible study on a Wednesday night, and in Sunday school, there's a lot of doctrine too. So the thing is, a lot of those ones we don't see, we just kind of see so I think a lot of preachers probably don't get some of the, I think they probably get more grief than they should, because there's probably a lot of good being preached that we're not seeing. Do you think that's possible, or, would you?
I would definitely, I wouldn't say anything's possible with that. Yeah, but I feel like, the firing up the bass thing, it seems like it's almost the emotional manipulation that the quote unquote trendy crowd gets accused of doing so much, just on a different, like one gets you fired up emotionally with your good feelings, and this one to go over here gets you fired up with your validate my feels.
Right.
It's the pulpit version of a concert.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, so and this is something too, I hear a lot of bashing of topical preaching. Topical preaching's got to be okay, right?
Not from us.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I was going to say that one I'm not going to bash. Topics aren't bad as long as you're pulling the right verses within the right context to validate your topic. Because if you're talking about salvation through faith alone, okay, well, you could go to Hebrews 11 for that, and a multitude of other places. So it's okay to talk about a topic.
Or like you preach on the Trinity or something. Like, okay, here's all the proof text for the Trinity.
So when people are only say you should only do within passage exegetical preaching, I'm not with that crowd. And I know that's a big thing with my aisle. But guys, yes, that's important. Exegeting from the scripture is important. But sometimes you have to address a particular topic. Let's say with progressive Christianity, you have to deal with the topic of homosexuality. Okay, this is a huge thing that's going on that people are trying to twist the scripture to fit within this. Okay, let's actually address this. So we're turning me to Leviticus 20, Romans chapter 1, and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I don't find that to be a strong critique. I think it's more the content that people need to focus on, not just, I don't like the fact that it's a topic.
Right.
But,
yeah, because I see a lot of criticism of topical preaching. But the thing is, I will say there are some people in the topical preaching camp that speak negatively against expository preaching, which I think there's a place for both. And
I'd agree. Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
And, I guess if we were going to talk about, if we're talking about the preaching, I guess some of the things that I will give the crowd, the verses taken out of context always, never ceases to amaze me, and,
and that's with any camp. Sometimes you're like,
yeah.
What? Wow, that was a stretch.
See your bias so strongly right now.
I think one of the accusations that are accurate is where, a guy finds a phrase that goes along with what he wants to talk about, and he just runs with it and takes things like, that kind of stuff goes on. And, that's one thing I can say I appreciate about some of the opposition is, I have seen myself, in other people's flaws. We often struggle seeing our own flaws, but often when we see it in other people, we start getting honest. We're like, you know what? I've done that same thing before too. And then, we can fix it. The problem is with a lot of these older guys, after you hit a certain age, you're never going to change anything, and they're going to,
maybe,
I don't know.
We've had some.
I've had some old people in my church change their mind on certain things. I was shocked. I was like, "Wait, you gonna change your mind at 82?"
Well, I'm thinking more along the I'm thinking more along the pastor line, But
yeah.
Well, there's that one Baptist pastor we know that became Catholic.
Oh goodness!
Oh wow!
That's all conversation for another time.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that. I would say another issue I have is the emphasis on or the vague term of hard preaching.
Mm-hmm.
I have no problem with hard preaching if you mean like we're being harshly honest with what the
truth bombs,
with what the topic says. But sometimes it seems when people say harsh preaching, they mean I can say the most offensive and obscene thing behind the pulpit. And if you get mad because I said it at the most offensive way possible, then you're the snowflake. It's well, maybe also tact, and you can deliver something harshly while also coming out like smoothing the edge a little bit. I've seen some people say some crazy things where I'm like, okay, that wasn't the way to say that. You can say it hard, like bluntly, you can be bold, but there's a point in time where you're almost wrathful with your words. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think that another thing too, though, is that's something else that's often you got to consider the situation, because again, if a pastor's preaching to his Sunday night crowd or something, that church might like that. That might be what they respond to. Sometimes that's their way of getting people's attention, their way of helping people remember what they said. Again, it can be off-putting to those maybe watching online, those on the outside, or even a visitor. I do think most pastors, though, are usually aware of their crowd and their congregation and how something might come across, but often they're completely unaware, again, of the fact that it's going outside those four walls. And so the thing is, I like, for example, Ron Garris. I don't know if you knew Ron Garris, but he's the one that say things like, "Why don't you run into my fist doing 90 miles an hour?" And he'd tell you
that guy.
Yeah, he'd tell you to stand behind his car when he was leaving, talk about running you over. He would say the most extreme things that if you read a transcript of his message, you'd be like, this man is a maniac. But the thing is, and I remember, as a teenager going to listen to him preaching, one thing I knew about that guy is he loved people. He loved teenagers. And so while that guy was up there talking about how he wanted to punch me in the face and run me over with his car, I knew that guy loved me. And that was just kind of his way. And as teenagers, we ate that up. We loved it. And I think there's a lot of that with pastors too. I've seen certain pastors just get completely blasted for, I won't name, but one in particular, people probably know what I'm talking about, where he's like kind of going after one of the bus kids in a church service. Well, one thing people don't realize, I worked on a bus route for years and years and years. A lot of parents that, especially moms, single moms raising their kids, they love having pastors or even other men in the church that are like strong leadership figures for their boys. And I used to have moms tell me, "Hey, can you talk to my son? he's having problems with this, he's having problems with that. And I would go and I'd kind of, lay into him. Be like, you better watch how you treat your mom. You better not act that way. And I get all over him, and the mom would be right there, and she'd be thanking me for it. And and some of these kids that, I used to just chew out like they were my own, were these same kids that when they, come to the bus, they'd run up and give me a hug. And a lot of times there's that relationship with people in the church. And so a lot of the criticism, I think, that comes from people who are just seeing these clips where they're really harsh in their judgment of these people. I think if they understood the context, they knew the situation, I think they judge things very differently because again, some of it's theatrics too. Phil Kidd, he was as a teenager and a young, when I first got the ministry, I loved listening to Phil Kidd. And I went to listen to Phil Kidd just to see how many, homophobic slurs he was going to use, see if he was going to say anything racist. And it was just kind of the entertainment factor of it. And I'm not saying all of that was right, but I don't think he was doing much damage when he was, preaching the way he preached. I think the intended audience got what they were supposed to get from it. And I think the internet's kind of what's changed some of this to where maybe we should be a little more careful, and take these things into consideration, since we know a lot of people hearing this stuff aren't going to get the context. They're not, going to know what's going on, or it's going to come through under some pretty severe scrutiny. But I think, so I'm not trying to defend all of it, but I think a lot of it can be defended if you understand what the background is.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're kind of making our point, because that's the accusations leveled. Oh, you're just doing that for entertainment value. Or you're doing that because you're playing to the crowd. Mm-hmm. Probably some of it is.
Yeah, some of it is.
You can still get strong biblical teaching, but I think that's where you're like, oh, we discount the trendies because they're doing something I consider trendy because they're doing something that their congregation likes, then that's bad. Mm-hmm. But you essentially just gave the example of these IFB preachers doing the same thing. It's just a different trend that they're playing.
Right. Or a different group of people, mm-hmm. Different things are
different
effective
audience.
For different people. And that was kind of, for me, it was like, man, it seemed like every single time I turned around, a pastor wanted to, it's so cool to call somebody out from behind the pulpit. I only had to do that one time. And you may have been there in that service. Were you there in that service? We had an awesome youth group, and there's this one day, and they could be chatty, and I didn't really care. I knew they were paying attention, but they're also close knit. But there's one day they were being extra rowdy, and like the front row, and I was like, "Hey guys, trying to talk here, and it's really distracting." And they're like, and like, one of the girls, one of the sweetest girls ever, like all color drained from her face. I'm like, "It's cool. I'm not yelling at you, but like, please relax. You can make fun of me and everything after the service." And that was, I'm not saying that you can't have some camaraderie with the people. Mm-hmm. Just sometimes it's more, and like you said, maybe change your tactic, because even though that might be your church's culture, if you're going to broadcast it to the entire world, they might not know your culture. They might not know the people. Also, I always can't help but think about that visitor, right? Like mm-hmm. somebody who's coming, like, I need God. This church is down the road for me, walks in, and oh man, that was horrible. Mm-hmm. They don't know any of the people. They don't know the culture. They just get a bad rub. Mm-hmm. And so that's why it's like, wisdom and prudence with some of those things. Because I cracked terrible jokes. I mean, there was one time I joked around that if somebody preaches during one of my sermons, I'll kneecap them. I use the kneecapping a lot as a joke, and I'm like, just kidding, but everyone knew I was kidding. Mm-hmm.
Just kidding, but for real.
But yeah, just kidding, but really, we'll drag you outside.
Right? Yeah, because a lot of times too, there's inside jokes in a church. Mm-hmm. And I've had people get offended, by my preaching before because of stuff that I said, but it because I often forget that I'm broadcasting the internet, because some guys preach to the internet, some preach only their congregation, some do a little bit of both. I mainly preach my congregation. I sometimes forget I'm preaching the internet. And so it's like, while everybody in the room, especially like on a Wednesday night, they got what I said, it's a lot of people are, elsewhere are going to question what was said. So I think a lot of that happens. And again, one thing that we're seeing too with the age of COVID and everybody kind of putting things online now, you've got a lot of pastors out out there now who've never thought for a second about anybody hearing this other than the people in that room. And so it's gonna, it'll be a while before they, change some of those tactics if they need to, probably after they have a video go viral or something like that. But, at the end of the day, they're probably not as bad as everybody's saying. And I'm often repulsed by a lot of the comments under the clips that because IFB preacher clips is always like, why does everybody hate me? All I do is just post the clips. Well, it's not just you. It's just all these nut jobs getting offended and just saying dumb stuff, after a 2-minute clip. Where's the Bible on that? Well, it was just a 2-minute clip. We don't just get up and read the Bible, through an entire message. We do talk.
Well, there's one time when a girl was singing "I'm Not Going to Hell" and people were like slamming it. I was like, that's distasteful.
Yeah, that's
also,
Twitter.
There's other times where I went and swing. There's one church, I forget what church it is. I wish I remember. It's an IFB church, but I'm part of a Facebook group, and it's there's people who are more like out of the IFB, and some people are gracious, and some people are like vitriolic, and they were just bashed as one church for staying open, and during COVID, and I was like, they should, and that's their choice. They can do that. They have the religious freedom to do that, and the government has no reason to say no. And and I think that's where this is where the thing from across the aisles I think is important, and I like the fact that we're doing this right now. It's the fact that it seems like whenever an IFB person does something, all the people who are ex-IFB feel like they need to hate it. And sometimes that also is returned the other way. Well, if they're doing it, we have to hate them. And it's, well, can't we just be objective and say, no, that's okay. That's okay. And if nothing else, that would help bridge the gap so that way it's not so toxic.
Well, I did that with Pastor Rager. There's a clip on IFP Preacher Clips about him preaching outside of an abortion clinic. And some people were making fun of him. I was like, everything he's saying, Margaret Sanger was someone that was a eugenicist. She was reaching out to the KKK to try to push her agenda. They are murdering babies. I was like, everything he's saying is correct. Now, his style might be a little bit obnoxious. I find it entertaining, but I don't think it's something to mock the person over. So, and that's actually one of the reasons why Nathan and I connected was after me defending him. There is too much toxicity on the internet in general, especially on Twitter. I'm new to Twitter for like a month and a half. I got blocked in the first 3 hours and I didn't even say anything yet. So that was kind of fun. But it was probably right. I probably wasn't going to say something obnoxious, but I think a lot of the people that are responding to the IFP Preacher Clips things are not necessarily offended. I think we all tend to just, someone disagrees with me, they must be offended by it. We don't get offended unless you attack my wife or my son. I'm not offended. But I think we're missing this opportunity where, they're offended, so I don't have to listen to them. It's like, no. Some of these are actually really good critiques. And as brothers in Christ, we are supposed to do that. Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do. That's what we try to do when we had Pastor Rager on was apply that same technique. Hey, I think some of the things you're saying are wrong. Brother in Christ, let's talk about it. And I think we missed that opportunity. We're just assuming everyone's offended by what we said because they disagree.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think that's actually where it went well with this conversation, with what we're doing now, is the fact that I wasn't so offended where I was like, I'm never talking to Tommy again. Some of the trolls, even that sometimes you'll say something on there and I'm like, yeah, like I don't even agree, but that was funny. Yeah. Some people do need to get thicker skin and stop looking at everyone on the other side of the aisle as everything is toxic, everything they say is horrible, and I'm just going to hate them instead of try to understand them a little bit. Yeah. So,
well, sometimes I do poke at people, and so I should probably take this opportunity to just say, though, like when it comes to IFB Preacher Clips, many of the followers, I think y'all are a bunch of snowflakes and you're half out of your mind and you need to get a life. So that was for them. I just threw that in there because sometimes you just got to poke at somebody. And so
I'll pin on a grenade and see what happens.
We made so much progress on unity, Tommy. What are you doing?
I don't like those people. Yeah, and that's, sometimes too, there's just people you're just not going to click with, and sure. There's groups and preachers out there that are good people and say love the Lord, but it's like I'm not going to fellowship with them. We're not going to click, and that's kind of how it is too when it comes to even some of the music stuff. It's just there's certain music is just very off-putting to me. I don't like it. Yes, it's my opinion. That's my preference, but it's just like, if I go to one of these churches, they just start singing some of the 7-Eleven stuff, man, it bothers me. I don't like it. I just don't want to be around it. And, and if somebody is a little more liberal than me or on their music or whatever, that's fine. But it's like, I do think we ought to reserve the right to sometimes just not necessarily throw somebody under the bus, but just say, I'm going to keep my distance from them. And I think that's
it's okay to say, I don't like that. That's not my thing.
Yeah, you can have preferences.
I don't hate the person, but that's not my thing. Honestly, you and I had a short interaction talking about music, and I know that a lot of the music nowadays is shallow, and it's because it's become part of this whole industry, right? Mm-hmm. So it's all about churning out the next album. So we don't need to worry about depth. We just need to worry about numbers, quantity over quality. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say that that's not an issue. I actually get really frustrated with a lot of the mainstream Christian music because I'm like, we worship the creator of the universe, and the best we could come up with is 4-chord songs. Mm-hmm. Like, he is the most creative being, and we're going to worship him with 4-chord songs in the key of G.
Like all these spoken word poems.
Yeah. So, and some stuff I believe nowadays is good. There is some good stuff here. There's some really trash old stuff too. And I think you've even admitted that. Like, yeah, there's some trash old stuff. But then there's songs like Be Thou My Vision. That's incredible. Mm-hmm. If anyone says Be Thou My Vision, it's not incredible. Are you saved?
There's an objective truth.
That's a joke. That's a joke. I don't want all the people commenting.
I want to see the comments.
I want to see the comments. You just want to see me get hated again.
I really enjoy it.
You really enjoy watching me get hated.
Because you're a queer maniac. That's our new inside joke, though. So thank you for that.
You really did.
We also call him Rachel Maddow with a Civil War beard.
Rachel Maddow's.
That was fun.
Thank you, Nathan, for that.
That was appreciated. No joke, when he said that, I was like, oh crap.
Yeah.
I looked in the mirror, I was like, dang it. Got me.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you took it good. But let's end it with this though. The one final thing I would like to make sure gets brought up that drives me crazy from your side. I find it very offensive, and I think it's flat out wrong when people like me are called legalist. I feel like your crowd has updated the definition of the word. I don't think preaching the things that we do is legalism in any way, shape, or form. Everybody's always criticizing the clip of Pastor Poindexter where he's talking about he's never heard a legalistic message. I agree with them. I don't think IFB is legalistic, and even often with what I would consider the updated definition of it, I still don't think we are. So, why? So the thing is, why do you guys insist on, throwing that label at us, and especially when you know that our crowd doesn't even define it that way, but yet that word gets used so much that it's just when I start hearing that word, I get turned off because it's like I feel like these people are just a broken record and they're not listening to the other side. I feel like it's a straw man argument. So, why keep using that term and throwing that accusation out?
Well, I think to have some unity here, I think we all do legalism at some point in time or another. And I think that's the point that Paul's giving Timothy is we need to address the things when we drift off, when we do legalistic things. And using the modern term of legalism being that you're elevating your preferences to that of biblical authority. And I think that is a problem. I think that's honestly the same thing we have a lot of problem with the Catholic Church, with their extra biblical teaching. I think when we see that, and I think we all tend to accidentally fall into that because it's an American thing, right? We always think we're right. So if I come
but I'm always right.
Well, you are always right, except when I tell you you're wrong. But we all come to these conclusions about things, right? And we might think we're right. And I've looked back at some things I taught in Sunday school. I'm like, I don't think I was right on that. I lost sleep over it. And I would have appreciated someone coming to me and say, I don't think you're right. I think you're applying your preferences or your biases to the point that above what it really is. And I think if we can all agree to just go back to Scripture and look at that, I think that's good. But I'm not just saying you're legalist. I'm saying we all participate in legalism. I think the progressive Christians are probably some of the worst at it.
Oh, they are the worst. I'll say it. It's the worst. It's the worst.
So, but it's all legalism. It's just rules that we're creating that aren't biblical, that we're holding others to, that are preferential. And I think that's what we're trying to say when we're talking legalism. And I do think there is some of that in the IFB. And I would say, okay, well, we might be offended by the word trendy. There's some things here that I think we can have a give and take and say, okay, well, is what I was doing a little bit trendy? Okay, well, maybe it was. Is what you were doing was a little bit legalistic? Maybe it was. Just some self-introspection, I think, is what's
because legalism has the two definitions, right? And I mentioned I have one legalism episode, and that's pretty much it, because it is an overused term. It's pretty much used in general, even if somebody's like trying to push actual biblical authority, right? Like, well, sexual immorality. They're like, oh, legalist. It's like, no, this is biblical. So, there's the salvation through works. That is the traditional use of the term legalism. And in that case, yes, I've never heard an IFB church be in that definition of legalism. That does not fit. Apparently, my stepmom was raised in one like that. She's like, oh no, they always taught the law, and if we didn't follow it, we weren't saved. I'm like, I don't know what IFB church you went to, because I've never heard that in my life. The second definition is the adherence to excessive adherence to a law or formula or things along that nature. Like we were talking about the music preference thing, right? Like I prefer the hymns. You might be a little bit looser, but then if we're like, nope, this is the way it is, and if you do that, you're in sin. That it would be the excessive adherence to a law or formula, if that makes sense. That would where that term legalism comes from.
Yeah, and I understand the second definition. I guess the thing to me, what's dishonest about having two different definitions and using the same word in a situation like that is like, when you're talking about the real legalism of adding works to salvation, I mean, that's damnable heresy. That will that teaching will send someone to hell. And so the thing is, when you take something that is that strong of a word and then you use that same word for something else that is completely different, there's a big difference between telling somebody you got to do this in order to be saved, than maybe somebody saying you got to do this in order to be a part of our church, or, you're sinning as a Christian if you do this thing. Those are two completely different things. And so it would be like me trying to, this is an extreme, but trying to update the word murder, and then, just beating somebody up. I decided that's murder too. And then I'm calling people murder because they punched somebody. It's like, no. You got to understand there's two definitions. I meant the second one, but no, murder is a pretty strong term. We probably should keep it where it belongs. And so the thing is, listening to these people just constantly throw that word out because somebody's preaching on standards, and even if they are preaching that something is a sin, if nobody's saying that you're not saved, or I guess I've probably heard some IFB preachers. I have heard some IFB preachers say that, if you're not doing this, this, and this, you probably never were saved. And I think that's wrong. I think that's out of line, where they're not, I don't believe this person really got saved because they never, repented of all their sins, and they never got in church, they never got baptized. I'm not saying you got to do that to go to heaven, but if you're going to heaven, you're probably going to do that. Well, then I can kind of see saying that because of the fact that causes people to, get this their source of assurance of their salvation is in their works rather than on the finished work of Jesus Christ. But I don't think that's what's happening in the IFB world. I think they're just saying, you're a Christian, you should do this. This is what the Bible says. Now, maybe sometimes they declare something a sin that really isn't. Maybe they take too strong of a position, or they take a scripture out of context. I think when that happens, I think we need to call that out. If a guy does go overboard on dress standards, we call him out for going overboard on dress standards and, using too much, eisegesis and rather than exegesis or whatever, but you can't call them a legalist. I think when you do that, and when, the other side is accusing IFB of being legalist, you're losing, you lose me when you say that. And I've heard a lot of people that I've talked to about this, or even people I called out on Twitter for this, and they double down with that term, and they just keep pushing that. And to me, it just tells me, you don't have an argument. If you're going to keep just screaming legalism every time, we just want to preach against sin, and there are, Christians can sin, Christians can get out of line. And and just throwing that word out there, I find it very off-putting, and I don't mind having insults and things thrown at me, because a lot of times this is what they are. It's insults. But, when you get accused, there's some things you don't want to get accused of. And to me, legalism is a horrible thing. I don't want to get accused of that. And I'm not. I don't think I'm a legalist in any way, shape, or form. And I think you got to really twist definitions and update things to even put me in that camp in an honest way at all.
Well, so I find that was a good explanation. I appreciate that. I also couldn't help but kind of the irony, sirens are going off in my head because two definitions of a word. So I think in my head, old paths, where there's two definitions, and the one definition, the new one that the IFB is using, is being used as a club against trendies. Speaking of trendies, there's another word that's given a second definition that's being used in a derogatory way that I think a lot of people don't appreciate. So I think I kind of find it funny that you're identifying these words that you don't like to be called, because honestly, what I've seen from what have you put out there, you use a lot of words like that too as derogatory terms of other people, including us.
Yeah, but the thing is, trendy too. I know trendy is an insult, and it's even meant to be an insult, but it's also, it's not a damnable accusation too. Where, like, to me, legalist is, like heretic is a really strong word, because that implies that implies some major guilt. Trendy, I'm not going to act like I don't use, put downs and insults, and I'm not going to act like that. But again, there's a difference between, like I said, like an insult, even something personal, than what I would consider an extremely harsh accusation. You can be a trendy and still be saved and go to heaven and love the Lord. To me, you can't be a legalist and be saved, and so there's a big, I would think there's a big difference there.
I understand. Yeah, I definitely can understand what your issue would be on that. One of the things that when you were talking about double definitions that kept popping in my mind was worldly. Because worldly is like, well, in context, when it says stepping out, it's like stepping out of the sinful nature of the world as opposed to the cultural relevancies. Some of the cultural relevancies, like if it's cultural to have like temple sex with prostitutes like they had back then, yes, that would be culturally sinful because God already said it was sinful before it was even cultural. But then it's like sometimes what gets labeled as worldly, like movie theaters, that's worldly. I'm like,
YouTube.
Or it's like, yeah, we could keep drawing lines, but it's like, what was that verse meaning when it said worldly? When you call me worldly, are you saying that I engage in my culture, or are you saying I'm engaged in the sinful nature of said world, which is what the verse seems to be implying? I think that's more honest with it. Otherwise, it gets a little too ambiguous and where we draw the lines. But I could definitely see where, being called a legalist, when you're like, whoa, hold on. The other definition, what I am, even if I am preaching my standards as preferences, whatever, I don't want to be called this. And I think you and I I'm not sure if we ever did this on purpose, but I think on our program, we tend to call it preferences.
Yeah.
We try to say you're holding up your prep, and we do mention legalism.
We make a lot of memes about legalism because it is funny and a lot of it's true.
So yeah, I could definitely see, and maybe on our end, maybe people should stop just throwing the ambiguous word out. And I will agree on this part. People need to articulate better on what their actual issue is. It's not enough to say when a guy preaches about music preferences or music beliefs to just go legalist. In fact, I saw this happen with Brad and Seamus. We have some friends of ours that are Messianic Jews. And he was talking about how he's a Sabbath day worshiper. And the first comment he got was legalist. And he goes, and he kind of pointed, I was like, this is my favorite. He's like, this is my favorite term that people use on me because it's so vague. So he was going by a second definition. He said he's like, I would be considered super liberal compared to other Messianic Jews. But to other Christians, I'd be considered too strict. So therefore I'm a legalist. So, he's like, it's this ambiguous word on a sliding totem pole. And so I do understand where it's like, if you don't articulate specifically what you mean when you say that word, you are really, you're going to miss the mark, and all you're going to do is speak past you, right? Like if I'm going to try to get Tommy McMurtry to understand where I'm coming from, just saying legalist without articulating it is not going to help you. Just going to you're going to hear an insult and dismiss it just as quickly as it was brought to you. Right.
And I'm not advocating for name calling by any means, especially not the term legalist. But I think it's just kind of funny because I think there's a lot of name calling going around. And I think when we're trying to especially address it in podcasts, maybe not in the memes because we're just trying to be punchy. But
yeah, memes are just meant to be
enjoy them.
Yeah, just meant to poke fun.
But we're not
ourselves.
But when we're talking about the podcast, we're not calling people legalists. We are saying this is some legalism. This action was legalistic, but we're not broad brushing someone's entire personality in that way. And that's why we'll talk about progressive Christianity. It has a lot of legalism in it, and we see that that legalism of progressive Christianity seem to have the same kind of basis we see in some of the ultra conservative Christian churches as well.
In the words of Vodi Bakum, progressive Christianity follows the 11th commandment, which is be nice always, unless I disagree with you.
Yeah, like I said, I think in our camp, the word heretic and heresy gets thrown around quite a bit. Those are strong terms, and it seems like, words, so I think though on the other side, I think kind of, an equivalent of that is the word legalism. And I think that gets thrown around way too much too. And so
that's probably fair.
There's not going to be an intelligent.
I've seen it. No, it does. I've seen it.
And there are like the old paths term, yes. The message I just preached about old paths, I believe the Jeremiah 6:16 old paths is he was calling on Israel to, if you read the previous chapters and just a lot of the things that are mentioned, I think generally what he's talking about is he's trying to call Israel back to loving God. And
agreed. Yes,
because they were
not
still
CCM music.
Yeah, they were still doing a lot of stuff that they were supposed to do, but they weren't doing it from the heart. They weren't doing it for the right reasons, and God wanted them to go back to loving Him. So to me, the old paths is kind of like the honeymoon stage, because he in a marriage, you want to get back to that when it was more about love and not just doing things out of duty and because you have to, because you want to have that good relationship. So to me, that's what the old paths is, the Jeremiah 6:16. I don't think it's wrong though to preach on the principle of the old paths where, and maybe Jeremiah 6:16 isn't the best verse to use, but when it says, wherein is the good way, you could say that an old path is something that is a path that it's tested, it's tried, where it leads, the twists and turns and the ups and downs, what you're up against when you take that old path rather than the new path. You don't know where it's going to lead. You don't know what it's going to take you through. And so I think when most preachers use that term, they're referring to that as a principle that, we want to stick with things that are tried and tested. And so that's why we use those old hymns. It doesn't mean there's not going to be some new songs that come along that'll be good, but I think over time we'll figure out. We'll see which ones make it, which ones survive. When new things are tried, there's a chance. All right, anything can happen. There's a chance that at Idea Day somebody might have a good idea that actually is a good way to do something. But you know what? I'm not going to try it until everyone else tests it out. And let me let these other people take that path, and I want to see where it leads. And if it leads somewhere good, then maybe 10 or 20 years from now, I might get on board with it. But in the meantime...
Like YouTube,
yeah, exactly. And so the thing is, a lot of the stuff that is, prevalent in, on what I would consider the trendy camp, those things, many of them do seem to lead places where a lot of us don't want to go. And it does. It seems like typically when the music goes, it's only a matter of time, and then the dress goes. And then as soon as that happens, the King James Bible goes out the window. And you got to understand, I said, in our world, these are all important things, especially the King James issue. And so when we, I think the King James issue is more important than the dress. And I think the dress is probably more important than the music. But the thing is, when I see the music go, I start, man, you know what? It's not going to look right, them singing these weird contemporary songs dressed in their suit and tie. They're going to have to change the lighting. They're going to have to change the look. There's, you can, one of the things, these things I'm planning on doing one of these nights when I get everything together on it, is I'm going to play clips of music, and I'm going to have like multiple choice pictures of what group sang that. And you'll be able to tell what group sang it by the music. There's a certain dress.
Let me know when you do that. I just want to be watching.
Oh, it's going to be great. It's going to be meant to just, tick off all the trendies. But I'm going to show auditoriums and say, here, listen to the music. Now, which auditorium was this sung in? And you'll get it right every time, because these things are all connected for some reason. And you might think it's not that big of a deal, but you know what? Once it gets to this certain look and this certain way, and this is why it matters to me, the King James Bible always goes out the window. And that's why I guess I get passionate about this stuff, and I get concerned if some of my friends start doing some of this, this stuff. And that's why a lot of these pastors too, these old preachers you hear, spazzing out about things that seem pretty trivial, is because they are seeing these guys going down a path, and it's like they know where that's going to end up. And so I guess that's where we have that old paths term come from. So there is a cultural old paths, and we all use Jeremiah 6:16 because we have to have a Bible verse before we, if we're going to talk about anything,
even if it's out of context,
right? Yeah,
Just do it.
But I do wish Baptists would actually figure out what that verse is actually talking about. When they use it, I think that'd be really important.
Suits.
Yeah, no, it's not about suits. But but if you want to take the principle of an old path, again, I've said this before too. If I find another group that I feel is preaching the Bible better than our crowd, doing more for the Lord than our crowd, that's better on doctrine than our crowd, and they're dressed a little different, I might end up going that way. I might lose the suit and tie, but I'm not seeing it. To me, where I'm seeing good doctrine being preserved, it is in churches that I think look like ours. And so that I think that's the motivation by a lot of the stuff that you see. And some of it might be misguided, but it comes from the heart.
Do you mind if I respond to that real quick?
Yeah.
I just want to give our perspective on that. So when you say, we see these, once this music goes and they start wearing jeans and King James Bible, one way I see that all connected is when people essentially have the scales fall from their eyes and go, oh, these were all preferences, and I'm just now going to focus on what the Bible says. Those things are all connected that way because they're all preferences. I think that's why you see them go in a domino effect, because you can't hold on to just one of those preferences and let the others go by, because you're starting to, the camps that we see, whether we want to call us trendies or whatever, I would just say that we're biblicists. I say once you see that those standards aren't really standards, they're just preferences, then who cares? It's Christian liberty. Right. And I'm going to let you, if you want to wear a suit, we have plenty of people that wear a suit at our church. You want to wear a suit? Wear a suit.
I wore a blazer Sunday. Hey.
Yeah. I look great in a suit, so I'll wear it all.
Probably didn't wear a tie though, did you?
No, I did not.
Well, yeah. And but I guess
I like ties though.
Right.
Like that.
But I guess here's the thing.
I have a big neck, so I don't like ties.
Yeah. So I guess for me though, I don't see how those things all would be connected. So I guess to me, if music, if dress, if all these things were just that, preferences didn't really matter, then it seems like we should be able to find some guy out there dressed like a trendy who's strong on the King James issue. It seems like we should find somebody out there who it's always like it's a whole package deal. And it's like, or one that's maybe doesn't have his King James and he's dressed more casual, but man, he is, real conservative on the music. it just, I don't think there's, to me, I don't see how these things would be a package deal, but yet it always seems they are, which just to me seems like a person has just found a new group and a new culture that they want to follow. And like I said, and I will admit a lot of what we do, it is cultural in many ways, but I don't think some of the things are. And so
I gotta say, I'll give you props for admitting that at least some of these things that you do are cultural.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of IFB pastors don't admit that.
Well, suit and tie is cultural. There's no two ways around it,
Exactly. And I still don't think there's anything wrong with that. I actually have about 60 ties, and I still love ties. I'm weird in that area. People are like, you can't stand that. I'm like, I still like to wear suits and ties. I enjoy it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. My sister actually goes to a church that I think they preach out of the King James, or it's the New King James. I don't know what with you on that, but and I know that they use both. I don't know. Her church is it's an independent Baptist church, pretty big in Virginia, but it's she's like, it's nice because it doesn't feel like it's either too far direction. So I don't know, maybe there is somebody out there that, has a strong King James position and is a bit more trendy in these areas. I don't know. I'd have to look around for that.
Right.
I can tell you the church I grew up in was all suits and dresses. It was all hymns, old hymns, nothing contemporary. There was no projector screen or anything, and the NIV.
Weird.
Right.
So I think you maybe just haven't seen.
I'm sure there's individuals out there, but again, too, I guess I'm thinking more about people who are these groups that are from the IFB leaving the IFB. I can't speak for all the other religions and things like that.
Yeah,
so
it's hard to do that. There's too many.
Yeah, exactly. So when it comes to the former IFBers, I guess, but. Yeah, but I don't know. Well, we probably better shut this down. This has gone long, but I really enjoyed it.
It's been fun.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. And
thank you.
I appreciate you guys being willing to do this with me. And so do you have any final words that you want to give before I close this out?
No, I just wanted to say real quick that, I'm glad we were able to have a conversation. I wouldn't have accepted your invitation if I didn't think we could be cordial, and I hope that this shows other people, maybe who are even more in our camp, that Tommy McMurtry isn't going to bite. He'll tell you what he thinks, and he's not going to. What?
Speak for yourself.
Speak for yourself.
Wait till I get behind my pulpit on Sunday.
But no, honestly, that was one of the things for me. I'm like, more people should do this. They should take people up on having conversations from across the aisle, and you might learn something. You might realize you've misrepresented somebody, and you might just realize better ways to represent your own position. So I just hope this helps other people to be like, that he was pretty nice to the church split guys, even though they disagreed on a lot.
I am a nice guy.
So.
Well, thank you guys.
That's what his mom says.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. But hey, again, so that's it, folks. I just proved it. I can be nice. I can be nice to people. I hope those of you who follow me and are on my side of these things, I'm probably going to get called a compromiser, and everybody's going to be mad at me for not just tearing you guys apart, but I'll let them all know I could have destroyed these guys, but had to be nice. No, but at the same time too, if you're a follower of mine, I hope this doesn't, behave yourself with these guys. All right. Don't act like maniacs in the comments. Don't go over their channel and start trolling them and acting like maniacs. If you do, you're going to make me look bad. All right. So, sometimes you need to have these polite conversations. And so I think this went pretty good. I think it gave our side an opportunity to be heard, hopefully by some of the other side. And because I don't think we're often represented fairly. And, and I think too, I learned some stuff from talking to them that I think is important. And at the end of the day, what I'm wanting to do with myself is I obviously want to preach the truth. I want to stand against stuff, but I don't want to get too caught up into using other people and using other people's names as just a way to get attention and create controversy. I think we should, be able to stick to issues on things and at least accurately represent. I think there is a time and place to call out individuals, call out groups, name them. But if you're going to do it, you got to do it right. if I'm going to say somebody believes something, it needs to actually be what they believe. And so I have adopted a rule for myself. If I talk about somebody, then I have to allow them at least an opportunity to talk to me. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be in this format, but I'm going to take their phone call and they can let me know, man, you misrepresented me bad. You were out of line. I should be able to do that, because let me tell you something. Just look at my name on YouTube. I have been called everything in the book. I've been accused of believing all kinds of crazy things that just aren't true. And none of these people, I'd like it if someone gave me the opportunity to kind of set the record straight on some of these things, and they don't do it. And I just think that's wrong. And so I don't want to do it to other people. And were clearly some things in here that we just don't agree on. And, you know, sometimes we just got to accept that. And I'm not really interested in making my mission now to go out and just devote a great deal of my ministry into attacking these guys and showing everybody just how horrible they are. I feel like, you know, I said what needed to be said, and I allowed them to talk to me, and I think that's all we can do. Sometimes at the end of the day, we just kind of have to go our separate ways and do our own thing, and let the Holy Spirit fix us where we need fixed. So I hope this was a blessing to you. If it was, let me know, and be appreciative of the Church Split for coming on here and talking with me. And this was a special edition of the Spirit of Liberty broadcast. Make sure you subscribe to this channel, and we're live every Sunday, 9 a.m. to 9:45 p.m. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you all next time.